Hello, everyone. As I mentioned in our quick little pop-in earlier, I'm Isabel. I'm starting my D1 year in August, and I'm here to kind of give a little crack the DAT tips and tricks and kind of give you an insight and a perspective into really just nailing everything with regards to pre-dental and dental admissions. Quickly, before I start off with everything, I wanted to quickly say to stay tuned and watch the whole session, because at the end of this, I'm giving away 2 discount codes to one lucky winner at the end who will receive 50% off on a CrackDAT subscription, and then everyone who watches it to the end will get a discount code. So make sure you stay tuned and look for that at the very end of this. So today's topic is study schedule, so DAT study scheduling. Let's pull up this little PowerPoint I have here. Okay. So, to start off, I want to just say that disclaimer, all of this information I'm providing is by no means you have to do it to get a perfect score. If you do this, you will get a perfect score. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm just going to give you my very candid advice on what experiences I have found to be helpful and things that I have heard from my friends and from different pre-dental students who have been successful in the DAT of ways to succeed in the long run with regards to study schedules. Also, always feel free to ask questions, write comments, anything that you want more information on, or you want more elaboration on. Just feel free to put those in there. So first things first is think critically about your own situation. So what I mean by this is that no schedule exists that is universal and will fit each person's life. So what I mean by think critically about your own situation is really take time before you start and you dive into studying for the DAT and adjust the kinds of things like what kind of student are you? Do you thrive in an environment where you work really well under pressure, where you like to cram and take tests, or would you rather spread it out over a longer period of time and solidify the information? Do you work in high stress environments, aka studying for a whole day? Would that be beneficial or harmful to your health, your mental health also included? Also thinking about where you are in your life. So are you a post-grad and you are taking a gap year, you're working for someone, you have to work a 9 to 5, how are you going to fit your study schedule in for that? Are you a college kid but you're only taking 3 classes this semester? Or are you a college kid taking 5 classes this semester? Are you in the summer and you're studying over the summer as your sole focus? Really think about who you are and what circumstances you are entering the study schedule in, and really be able to adapt that schedule to your personal needs. Because frankly, I think that there's a lot of quote unquote perfect study schedules or quote unquote optimal study schedules that are guaranteed to get you to have the results that you want. But truthfully, that's not how that specific study schedule is not necessarily going to work for you and your circumstances. So second point I have here is that adapt/build schedule based on your circumstances, which we just discussed. And don't be afraid to adjust your schedule. I know a lot of people, and we'll talk about this later too, kind of fixate on the idea that once you have a study schedule, you have to be super stringent to following that study schedule. And I think that is a very important skill in your study journey, is being able to stick to your study schedule, because it holds you accountable and it holds you responsible to putting in the hours that you need to put in to be successful. But you need to also think critically about your situation, and if you are burning yourself out too fast and you're not retaining anything, you need to adjust accordingly. Or on the flip side, if you are doing 30 minutes a day and you're not learning anything because you really haven't dug deep enough, you need to adjust accordingly. So that's what I mean by don't be afraid to adjust your schedule. Definitely have a schedule, because accountability is also key, but think critically throughout your study journey to make sure that you are optimizing your entire studying. So first thing first, after you've thought about your study schedule and your personal habits and your personal situation, you need to take a diagnostic test. And I think that this is very important. I think that it's pretty vital in kind of shaping how you structure your schedule. So for example, like when I took my diagnostic, I went in completely blind. I had taken obviously most of my prereqs for dental school, so I had a pretty good science basis. I had never even maybe I'd seen a couple here and there PAT practice problems, but I never really dived in. And when I took the diagnostic, I was like, wow, okay, I need to put some more effort into the PAT. I did not even know that was what I was going to be thrown at. So after you take your diagnostic, what is a huge portion of taking your diagnostic is being able to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. And that's not just based on the score report, but also how you felt you knew the material. So for example, I took a couple diagnostics where I felt like I was absolutely blindsided guessing every answer for my bio section, and I ended up getting a really good score, but that does not necessarily mean that I knew those answers or that I was really good at bio, aka it's my strength. It just meant that for that one specific test, ended up being a good guesser, which is an important skill to have for test taking, but that does not mean that I did not need to study in the bio section. So that's really important too. Secondly, is kind of use this to guide your schedule. So for example, like I said, once you combine what your strengths and weaknesses are based on the score, but also based on how you felt you did or knew the material, use that to then adjust what hours you're going to be needing to put into certain sections. Also, like if you say you're really bad, not really bad, say you need to improve on your quantitative reasoning and your reading comprehension, but you crush the sciences. That doesn't mean you put the sciences in a box and you say, okay, I'm not going to touch the sciences. That means that you kind of layer the sciences in throughout when you're spending the majority of the time working on your reading comprehension and working on your quantitative reasoning, but you're still layering it in just at a less focus than your other ones that you need to work on. Next is balancing schoolwork studying. So again, kind of what I mentioned earlier about being not afraid to adjust your schedule. This is where I'm going to talk about make a schedule and stick with it. So I think that when you have to balance, which everyone has to, balance school, work, studying, social life, and like personal life, there's so many things you have to balance regardless of what kind of student you are coming in to study for the DAT. So that's why I think that making a schedule and sticking with it is super important in that balancing act, because if you have a critical thought out schedule and you one day wake up really tired and you're like, I really personally am going to feel better if I sleep for this extra hour because you said you were going to wake up at 6 and study before work instead of studying for an hour at 5 when you get off work, being able to do that, have that adjustment, or using your study schedule to be like, no, listen, I need to get up and it's going to pay off in the long run. So having that sort of stringent boxes to check is really important in holding you accountable and making sure you follow through with what you told yourself you're going to do. It also does help a lot to having the schedule written out, because once you start grinding on studying, all the days slightly blur together in the sense that I couldn't tell you 2 weeks ago on Tuesday what exactly I studied unless I looked at my study schedule. So that's what I mean by they blur together. And having that study schedule really helps you map out what exactly you need to do so you're not overstudying for certain sections and understudying for others. So my next point is do something every day. So do something every day is a really important point here, is that you need to be able to always do something. And by something, I mean, maybe it's laying in your bed and doing 20 minutes of PAT work. Maybe it's studying for an hour here to do a practice section of biology. Maybe it's, I don't know, doing a reading comprehension passage. But repetition is key for studying for the DAT. And so when you take days off, take a day off though. I mean, granted, we'll get to that later, but I think that taking a day off is important. But doing something every day really allows it to solidify in your brain and really allows you to retain the information instead of just taking a few days off and forgetting what you learned a couple days ago. So my next point is try not to overwhelm or underwhelm yourself. So that's a pretty important point too. So what I mean by overwhelm or underwhelm yourself is if you have, say you're working, I keep bringing this up, I know I'm just trying to fit different niches, but say you're working 9 to 5 and you tell yourself you're going to study for 3 hours every day from, say it takes an hour for you to commute home and make dinner and eat dinner. So you say you're going to study from 6 to 9, but if you have to work out or see your friends or whatever, and then you want to get back up at 7 to work out and you're going to bed at midnight because of extraneous things you have to do, and then you're getting less sleep and you're not used to that sleep, your body's reacting poorly to that, you're overwhelming yourself and you want to be able to make sure you adjust to that. But at the same flip side, don't say I'm going to do 30 minutes of bio practice or 30 minutes of practice every day. And then you're saying, again, I'm not retaining any of this because I'm not repeating myself enough to have significant outcome. And then exactly, last point, find what works for your situation. So this is a common theme, but just being able to think critically about you and your personal situation, your work, your life, your workout routine, whatever you do that makes you you and makes you tick, being able to adjust your study schedule to make sure you figure out how to balance all of it. And that's really something that you're going to have to yourself look into and really be introspective about that. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of go through different sort of studier scenarios, and kind of talk about the tips and tricks that I've seen and I've talked to my friends about, and which we fall into different categories. So first, I would say that if you're working full time, so this is the 9 to 5, this is the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., whatever hours you work, you're in the job and you are fully working. So obviously study before or after your work hours, but make sure you dedicate a certain amount of time to that thing, that allotted time. So make sure you say every day, I'm going to study for 3 hours, or every day I'm going to study for 2 hours. I'm going to study for 1 hour when I wake up, 1 hour when I get home. Just, again, making sure you very consistently place that marker in. Use the weekends wisely. This is something that has been really emphasized to me from my friends who were both full-time students and full-time employees, is that your weekends need to become your best friend, in the sense that they need to become the time that you take those full-length practice tests that take a whole day, whole morning, where you need to sit down and really practice and do the whole test, so you build up that stamina and you build up that endurance to do a longer test, standardized test like the DAT is. And then lastly is being transparent with your employer. I know that I have a lot of friends who are working in dental offices who are also studying for the DAT, and mentioning that to them also, they get really empathetic for that because, right, they had to go through the same thing at one point in their lives as well, at one point in their careers. So they're empathetic for that, and they also bring up interesting things in relation to how it also relates to their practice, or oh, I had this tip and trick, and they also then get more. If you mention that you were really tired, or you aren't performing as well because you're studying for this, it just to me it just brings out a way better relationship between you and your employer, and that's really important, especially when you're going through a stressful time as studying for the DAT. So next part is the full-time college student. So this was as I was in college when I was studying for the DAT. I didn't fully start studying it. We'll talk about this after because I'm the last minute studier. But the full-time college student, one of my friends did this. One thing that I found to be really emphasized by those who were full-time college students were looking at your syllabi, all of your syllabi, not just your major classes, but all your syllabi, and plan accordingly. So don't try to tell yourself on a Sunday right before the week of midterms that you're going to take 2 full-length practice tests. That's outrageous, and you're going to have way other things on your plate and be completely preoccupied. So you're not going to be able to dedicate the time that you need to take that test. Or if you do, it's going to probably be a little bit, I don't know, not as complete or not as thorough as you would have liked. And your schoolwork might also take a plunder as well, which would ultimately negatively affect your application in the long run, because GPA is also very important in applying to dental school. So that's just completely something to be aware of and very much avoid if you can. So study with consideration of corresponding core science classes if applicable. So what I mean by this is, if you're taking biochemistry and physiology and anatomy all at the same time while you're studying for the DAT, lot of that is going to be very relevant for your studying. So if you have a day where you have a biochemistry lab, a physiology class, and anatomy class all on the same day on Tuesday, say, and you're in class for, I don't know, 7 hours studying biology, I would wait to stagger your biology studying for the DAT until the next day so that you're staggering it and you're retaining and you're doing the repetition that is needed to put those facts into your memory. That's what I mean by study with consideration of corresponding core science classes. So the things that you're going to be learning in class are going to be relevant to your studying, but just don't try to overwhelm yourself on one day where you're studying biology for 7 hours. And then the next day you're not doing, or 2 days in a row, you're not doing any biology. Consider all extracurriculars / volunteering as well. That's a pretty, hopefully explainable statement. Just make sure you're considering your whole schedule. Don't just consider your classes and don't just consider your syllabi, but consider when you have to be certain places and when those certain places you can be kind of having some downtime, or you could be studying, or you could be doing some flashcards, anything like that. But others when you have to be fully engaged, or if you also work a job, like structuring all of that in to your study schedule so you can plan it out and be really accountable to that schedule. And then again, last point, which I just kind of touched on, was try to make out a consistent plan and generally stick to it. So we kind of talked about this too, and I told you it would be a recurring theme, but just you have to find this nice balance and this nice midpoint between sticking with the plan and thinking critically and being able to adjust that plan, but make sure you are shooting for a plan that's the most accurate that you can stick to, because ultimately that accountability is going to be key to your success. So the last minute studier. So I was a last minute studier, and I did this personally because I do better. I do well when I have to be put under pressure, and when it's kind of crunch time, I step up to the plate and I perform because there's no other option, right? So first things I would say, there's no shame in doing this. I think that a lot of things when I was studying, a lot of the study guides and the study schedules I was reading were just kind of shaming last minute studiers. They were saying that, the last minute studier is not necessarily going to be effective, and you need to be studying for at least 12 weeks to be able to get all the information in. And truthfully, I don't think that you ever could be. You're never going to memorize everything that you need to know for the DAT. There's going to be a random question in biology about some random species of birds or something that you have no idea, but there's no way you could have prepared for that. So I think that that's silly within itself. But don't if you're like me and this is how you choose that you're most effective in studying, don't be discouraged by what you see out there. Again, it's all very personal. Your study schedule is very personal to your life and your situation and how much time you can dedicate. So with that being said, if you are a last minute studier, you're going to want to dedicate a lot of hours to this studying. You're going to want to essentially make this your full-time job, or as much as you can. So I studied for, I don't know, probably about 4 weeks and 4 or 5 weeks. And I studied every day. I took 2 days off. And I studied every day from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m. And I took a 1 hour break to have dinner. And I was doing a working lunch in the middle. So I was a little bit burned out at the end of it. I was definitely ready to take the test and be done. But that was kind of how I needed to do it in order to motivate myself and push myself to getting all the information. Because if I was doing it any longer than that, I would have completely not been able to retain anything and just be completely burnt out. So if you're going to study in a shorter amount of time, you definitely do need to put the hours in it and make it into your full-time job, because ultimately you can't cut. If you're going to cut, my whole thing is that, say, what's the book? 10,000 hours is what you have to put in to be an expert in something. So say you wanted to put in, this is totally arbitrary numbers, but say you wanted to put in 100 hours in the DAT, and you are going to do 1 hour every day or every week for 10 weeks. That's 100 hours. So if you're going to cut that time in half and have five weeks studying, you need to be doing 2 hours a week. Just stuff like that, where you can't be cutting corners and not putting the time in. You just need to be able, if you're going to go for the last minute study and cut the week amount of time, you're going to need to up the amount of hours that you're doing per day. Also, it's okay to take small breaks. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier about taking breaks, taking a day off, taking a weekend off. taking a work day off, being able to really monitor yourself. And that's what my last point is prioritize your mental and physical health. So if you're someone who has to work out to feel clear-headed and feel very motivated, then you need to prioritize that. If you're someone who gets really easily overwhelmed and needs to meditate every day, or if you need to meditate, those are two different things. If you're someone who gets really overwhelmed when you have a lot on your plate, being able to recognize that and manage that, or if you just need to meditate every day and have a clear head in order to study effectively, you need to prioritize those little things. Don't cut corners to study and fit more hours in studying, because ultimately your mental and your physical health is going to be what is reflective in how well you can perform and how well your body is going to be able to put up for you. So lastly, I think my last little section is take two. So this is someone who's already taken the DAT, and I think that also, amazingly, you are in a really unique situation if you've already taken it and this is your second go around. Because you have done the full test and you've gotten a score report and you can see exactly what you need to do. All diagnostic tests are just baselines. They're guesses. They're very educated guesses because there's a lot of data into how you arrive at a score. But this is the real deal. So first, I would say, is reflect on how the test day went. So that's kind of, by this question, there's a lot of, one of the podcasts we're going to do later, one of the live broadcasts we're going to do later this summer is about the test day. And there's a lot of nuances to the test day that I had no idea what to expect going into it. And coming out of it, I could have done a lot of things differently. But if you didn't perform as well as you would have liked, reflecting on how that test day went and to see if there was anything that caused you to trip up or anything that really detrimentally affected your score via the environment or the information or the timing of the test or how you did the writing on the laminated sheets, just a bunch of different little factors that you don't necessarily think about until you take the test. So reflect on that. And then secondly, and ultimately very important, is reflecting on the score report. So see what areas that you did not perform as high as you would have liked and targeting those. And tackle those problem areas really hard is what I would suggest, is that now that you have an official score report under your belt, taking those scores and looking at problem areas and then really aggressively attacking those. And then I would say with because you also ultimately have already studied for the DAT once. So you're not starting new, you're not doing a baseline, you're starting with a very solid foundation on studying. So you just need to really polish up the areas that you performed well in, because you don't want to forget everything that you had already learned, but then tackling the areas that you did not perform as well in very aggressively so that you can get those areas up while maintaining the other areas that you performed how you wanted to, keep them at the level that you performed. And then obviously once you get to that approach, once you get to that kind of full, well-rounded approach to studying, then that's when you need to use similar approaches to what we talked about earlier. So take that and then think critically about your situation, and then take the time to sit down and figure out what's going on with your life, what's going on in your circumstances, and then choose the type of studier you want to be, and then build your study schedule. But that, once you get to that point, it's kind of similar to what we had talked about earlier, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. So lastly, kind of as a little wrap-up point, just some general tips about creating the study schedule is use downtime to do a lot of your PAT stuff. So a lot of your PAT generators and stuff, it's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of just familiarizing yourself with how those questions work. And so I definitely did a lot. I did some days and some half days where I was studying just PAT, but I also, every time before I went to bed, I would spend 20 minutes looking at PAT questions and generators, and then I would spend every working lunch looking at PATs. It was and the app on your phone with CrackDAT is incredible for all of that. So doing that is such an awesome use of your time and also very effective to upping your PAT score, but that doesn't necessarily need to be specifically scheduled into your DAT study schedule. Additionally, a review. The majority of my studying personally was reviewing the questions that I had gotten wrong, also even gotten right but had guessed on. So don't sit there and just doing as many questions as you can is what you need to do, because you need to get exposed to all the questions, but being able to go through and review those questions is even more important, and that's how that relates to studying scheduling is that you could take a practice test or take a practice test section, and then the next day, don't review it that day because you have it fresh in your mind, and you can review it the next day. Or you could just be like, I'm going to take the bio review this morning and dedicate my 3 hours to doing that and reviewing it very hard. But so being able to think critically about your review sessions along with your study sessions, don't just block times to take tests, block times to also review it. Watch explanation videos. Also, that is an incredible tool and also helps so much in the long run. So you're not just reading something and regurgitating, you're actually learning, you're trying to understand what's happening. So this explanation videos is also an incredible resource, and definitely look for kind of anchoring that into your study schedule as well. And then ultimately, set a test date and stick to it. You will be prepared, I promise you. I think everyone, honestly, I've ever talked to kind of feels like either I'm so ready to just take this and be done, or it's a mix between that and I'm not prepared at all. But you're going to have both of those feelings, and you're going to do well, and because you prepared, and if you've stuck to your study schedule and you've critically thought about it and you've critically adjusted it and you've really put the effort and time into it, you will be prepared. You just need to stick to your test date. Ultimately, trying to push it back or saying you're not prepared and altering your study schedule to add or take away weeks just gets more confusing and adds more stress to your life than you need at this time. So now that we've come to the end of the podcast, thank you guys so much for listening. We are going to give away the coupons and the discount codes. So I'm going to pick one $50 or 50% off winner from the listeners who have stayed tuned in. That will be announced in the comments. And then I will DM you via the CrackDAT account and give you the information on how to redeem that. But for everyone else, even if you stayed tuned in and you did not win the 50% off coupon, everyone gets a 10% off coupon code. So if you go sign up for CrackDAT, and use the coupon code STUDYDAT now. That'll be open for a week, so starting today and going until next Tuesday, you can use this coupon code, share it with your friends, give it to anyone you would like, and just really use it and join and sign up for Study for DAT now, because it's one of the most incredibly resources and will really help you in the long run. Also, for questions, just keep putting them in here. We will keep writing them in the comments. I will go through all of them and collect them and have answers for all of them beginning of next week's podcast. So come back and tune in next week at 8 p.m. next Wednesday, and I will answer all of those questions and give a good, thorough discussion to those as well. So I'll let the questions kind of keep coming in before I sign off. So I guess that's it. That's our time for today. So I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in and for joining us on our first live broadcast of Crack the DAT. I hope today was helpful, and remember, keep writing your questions and I will have them all for next week. And don't forget to use the coupon code, share with your friends to get some savings, and I will DM the winner of the 50% off code too. Bye guys. See you next week.